This is Miss Humbert here. And right now we're going to be finishing up our notes 4. So we're going to be talking about perfect square trinomials. So hopefully you've already done the first part of the practice sheet and you're ready to learn about the next part, okay? So sometimes when you factor, the factors end up being identical, meaning you have the same two binomials being multiplied together. So when you have them and they're identical, you can actually write them as one term. So if we have something like x minus 4 times x minus 4, we can actually write that as the quantity of x minus 4 squared. Okay, so that's what we're going to kind of be working on for these last 4 problems here. So let's take a look at number 7. So for number 7, we're going to set up our x. So we're taking 1 times 44. And when you do 1 times 44, you end up getting 44 on top, and you're adding to a negative 24. So here is where we have a positive product and a negative sum, which means both my factors need to be negative. So what multiplies to a positive 124 and adds to a negative 24 is going to be negative 12 and negative 12. So now I'm ready to set it up for grouping. So I keep my n squared the same. Then I'm going to split up negative 24n, and I'm going to write it as negative 12n minus 12n plus 144. And once I've done that, I'm ready to split it up to get it into my grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If it would let me pick a pen, I'd feel really good about myself. Thank you. So now I'm going to make 2 groups. Between n squared and 12n, I can take out an n, and then left over, I'm left with n minus 12. Now I notice that there's a minus sign between the second group, so I need to take out a negative greatest common factor. So what divides 12 and 144? Well, that's going to be a negative 12. So when I do that, that's going to change the signs of everything, and I'm left with n minus 12. Now, remember, we want to make sure that our leftovers are matching. If they're not matching, so then I know now what I can do is I can pull those out like so. So now I've gotten rid of those, and then in the second parenthesis, I'm going to write what's left after that, which is n minus 12. So now I have n minus 12 times n minus 12. Well, I can write that now as 1 parenthesis squared. And if they do match, I do want you guys to be writing it in that format. So all that means is we have n minus 12 twice. So let's go ahead and let's set it up for number 8. We're going to take 9 times 4, which is going to be 36. So we're multiplying to 36 and adding to a negative 12. Positive product, negative sum, both my factors need to be negative. And I'm going to end up using negative 6 and negative 6. If you're still struggling setting up the x, please let me know so I can help you. So now we're going to split it up so we can factor by grouping. So instead of writing negative 12y, I'm going to write it as negative 6y minus 6y, and then I'm adding 4. So now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to make my 2 groups. Now between 9 and 6, I can take out a 3. Between y squared and y, I can take out a y. Then I'm left with 3y minus 2. Out of the second group, I notice there's a negative in the middle, so the greatest common factor that I take out is going to be negative. Between 6 and 4, I'm going to take out a 2. So I'm taking out a negative 2. Well, 6y divided by a negative 2 is a negative 3y. And then a negative 4 divided by a negative 2 is a negative 2. So I notice here that my leftovers are matching. So I'm going to go ahead and write those out. And then once I get rid of those, I'm going to write what's left after that in the second parenthesis, which again is 3y minus 2. So I notice I have the same factor written twice. So I can write it as 1 parenthesis squared for number 8. Next, let's take a look at number 9. So for number 9, I noticed that 18, 48, and 32 can all be divided by 2. So I'm going to start by doing that. I'm going to divide each of these guys by 2. Now, if you forget, it's really not a huge deal, but let me tell you that it makes your numbers a lot easier to deal with. So then we end up getting 9y squared minus 24y plus 16. So that 2 is your little sister. We can ignore our little sister till we get to the very end of the problem. So to set up my x, I'm just taking 9 times 16, which is going to give me 144, adding to a negative 24. Well, this x is the same as number 7, so I know I'm going to need negative 12 and negative 12. So I'm going to keep ignoring that 2 there. So I have 9y squared, and instead of writing 24 squared, I'm going to write negative 12y minus 12y plus 16. So now what I want to do is factor by grouping. So I'm going to make my two groups. Out of the first column, between 9 and 12, I can take out a 3 and a y. When I divide each of those by 3y, I'm left with 3y minus 4. Now I notice that in between the two groups is a negative sign, so I need to take out a negative. Between 12 and 16, you can take out a 4. And then you're going to divide each by a negative 4. So when you divide each by a negative 4, you're again left with 3y minus 4. So the first thing I'm going to do is take out the 3y minus 4. And then I'm going to get rid of that. Once I've factored that out, I'm going to write what's left over, which is again 3y minus 4. So now I see that I have the same parenthesis written twice, so I'm going to write it as 1 parenthesis to the second power. Now before I'm completely done with the problem, I need to remember my little sister from the beginning of the problem and make sure that that 2 is multiplied on the outside of that quantity squared. Next, let's take a look at number 10. So for number 10, I notice that 50, 40, and 8 are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to take out a greatest common factor, and I'm going to divide each of those coefficients by 2. And that gives me this right here. So now I'm just going to focus on this for my x. So 25 times 4 is going to give me 100, and that's multiplying to a positive 20. So to fill out the x, we're going to need 10 and 10. And then when we go to factor by grouping, what we're going to do is we're going to split this up. So my 25y squared is going to stay the same, still ignoring my little sister, my GCF. And instead of writing 20y, or 20g I guess it should be, I'm going to write 10g plus 10g, and then the 4 is going to stay the same at the end. So now I'm ready to factor by grouping. Between 25 and 10, I can take out a 5 and a g, and I'm left with 5g plus 2. Now out of the second group, I could take out a 2, and again, I'm left with 5g plus 2. So I notice that my leftovers here are matching, so I can go ahead and factor those two out. And once I've gotten rid of those, I'm going to write what's left over, which is 5g plus 2. Now, I want to write those as 1 parenthesis squared. So I have 5g plus 2 quantity squared. And I don't want to forget my little sister from the beginning, that greatest common factor that I took out. So that's going to be a 2 right there. So that's your final answer for number 10, and that concludes the second part of the note video, so we should be set to finish up your practice.